My sister set me up. She never expected what came next. I trusted my sister with everything. That's the part people don't understand when they hear what happened. They think betrayal always comes with warning signs. Something obvious, something loud. But it doesn't. Sometimes it looks like help. Sometimes it looks like family. My name is Alice Caldwell, and I built my company from nothing. No shortcuts, no safety net, just long nights, calculated risks, and a clear understanding of how systems work. That was always my strength, seeing patterns before others noticed them. When Lily came back into my life, she didn't look like a threat. She looked like someone who needed help. She had always been different from me, less structured, more emotional, but she was still my sister. That mattered. So I gave her a place to stay. Then I gave her a chance. At first, it was small responsibilities. Administrative tasks, basic coordination. She handled them well enough to gain my trust. Slowly, I gave her more access, more responsibility, more visibility into how the company worked. Looking back, that's where it started. Not the betrayal, the access. Because once someone understands your system, they don't need to break it. They just need to use it differently. The first time something felt off, it was subtle enough to ignore. It came through a weekly financial review, something I had done hundreds of times without concern. The numbers aligned, but the structure didn't. It's difficult to explain unless you understand systems deeply. Sometimes everything looks correct, but still feels wrong. I went through the report again. Then again, there were minor inconsistencies, timing gaps, slight misalignments in how entries were recorded, nothing large enough to trigger an alert, nothing that would stand out to anyone else. But I noticed. When I asked Lily about it, she didn't hesitate. "It's just a formatting issue," she said calmly. The system update changed how the entries display. Her answer was quick, confident, too clean. But I dismissed the thought, because questioning her felt unnecessary. And that was the problem. Every time something didn't feel right, there was always a reasonable explanation, always a way to make it seem smaller than it was. Over time, I stopped questioning. I trusted her more, and without realizing it, I started giving her deeper access. Approvals, financial oversight, client interactions. I thought I was helping her grow. I didn't realize I was giving her control. The morning everything collapsed began like any other. I woke up early, reviewed my schedule, and prepared for a high-level investor meeting later that day. There was nothing unusual about it. Everything was structured, planned, and under control, until it wasn't. The knock on my door was sharp and deliberate, not casual, not accidental. When I opened it, 2 officers stood outside. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. Then they said my name, and everything shifted. They explained that there were allegations of financial fraud connected to my company, connected to me. I didn't react immediately, not because I didn't understand, but because it didn't make sense. I built every system in that company. I knew how every process worked. There was no space for something like this to happen without me knowing. Then they showed me the documents. Signed approvals, transaction records, internal reports. Everything traced back to my credentials. Clean, organized, convincing. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't random. This was structured. And anything structured can be traced. As they led me outside, I saw her. Lily stood across the street, watching. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't confused. She wasn't even pretending. She was calm, and that told me everything. That moment was more important than the arrest itself, because the documents could be explained, the accusations could be challenged. But her expression? That couldn't be misunderstood. This wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. As I sat in the car, I didn't panic. I didn't react. I thought. I went back through everything, every decision, every system, every access point I had given her. It aligned too perfectly to be accidental. She hadn't just taken advantage of the system. She had studied it, used it, rebuilt it in a way that made it look like I never lost control. That level of precision wasn't emotional. It was calculated. And that meant one thing. If she built this structure, then somewhere inside it, there would be a flaw. The investigation moved quickly, and the evidence against me was nearly flawless. That's what made it dangerous. Every document was clean, every transaction aligned, every approval traced back to my credentials without error. It wasn't messy. It was precise. And precision always leaves a pattern. While they questioned me, I wasn't focused on defending myself. I was thinking about the systems I had built. Because I never designed systems for growth alone, I designed them for control. Months earlier, I created a shadow audit layer. It wasn't part of the main system. It didn't appear in standard reports. It operated quietly in the background, tracking deeper data, login origins, device signatures, access routes, behavioral patterns. It was meant to detect external threats. But now, it might expose an internal one. I requested access under the pretense of reviewing my own records. It wasn't easy, but eventually, I got limited visibility. That was enough. Because I didn't need everything. I just needed one thing. Proof that something didn't match. And once I found that, everything else would follow. Once I gained limited access to the shadow audit logs, everything became a matter of focus. I didn't rush. Rushing creates errors, and I couldn't afford even one. I started with timestamps. Every transaction tied to my name was mapped against my actual activity, my calendar, my device usage, my login patterns. That's where the first crack appeared. There were approvals made under my credentials at times when I wasn't logged into the system. Not just once, multiple times. Subtle enough to avoid detection, but impossible to ignore once seen. Then I checked device signatures. Each system login leaves a fingerprint, an invisible identifier tied to the device used. Most people don't know that. I do. And the devices linked to those approvals weren't mine. I leaned back and let the pattern settle in my mind. She didn't break the system. She learned it. Then she used it against me. That's what made this dangerous. She wasn't careless. She was precise. But precision creates repetition. And repetition creates traceable patterns. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was reconstructing her entire strategy. And the more I saw, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. I moved deeper into the data, building connections between actions. Every unauthorized approval had a sequence. Login, access, adjustment, exit. It was consistent. Too consistent. And that's what exposed it. Because my workflow had always been different, I didn't operate in rigid patterns. I adapted based on context. That's how I built the company in the first place. But these entries, they followed a fixed structure, like someone copying behavior instead of understanding it. I isolated the differences, mapped them side by side, real actions versus replicated ones. And there it was, a gap. Small, almost invisible, but undeniable. She could imitate my authority. But she couldn't imitate my thinking. That was the flaw. And flaws are where systems collapse. I documented everything carefully. No assumptions, no emotion, just facts. Because when I presented this, it couldn't sound like defense. It had to sound like truth. And truth, when structured correctly, doesn't need to be argued. It proves itself. Outside, the narrative was already being shaped. News outlets picked up the story quickly. Executive under investigation. Financial misconduct in growing firm. My name was attached to every headline. And Lily? She stepped forward as the solution. She gave controlled statements, presented herself as the one stabilizing the company during a crisis. Calm, responsible, in control. It was strategic and effective. To anyone watching, she looked like the person holding everything together. And I looked like the reason it was falling apart. That's when I understood the full scope of her plan. This wasn't just about removing me. It was about replacing me completely. Taking my position, my authority, my identity within the company. But she made one critical mistake. She believed perception was enough. She believed controlling the story would secure the outcome. She didn't understand something I learned a long time ago. Perception is temporary. Structure is permanent. And I was about to expose the structure. I needed time, but not much. The evidence was already there. I just had to organize it in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. I built a timeline. Every action, every login, every unauthorized transaction. Then I layered it with system data, device signatures, access routes, behavioral patterns. It formed a sequence that was impossible to break because it didn't rely on assumptions. It relied on facts. The more I built, the more confident I became. Not because I believed I would win, but because I knew the truth was already complete. This wasn't about proving innocence anymore. It was about revealing reality. And once reality is revealed clearly, there is no space for manipulation. I finalized everything into a structured release, not just for the investigators, for the board, for the investors, for anyone who mattered. Because if this stayed internal, it could be controlled. But if it went public, it couldn't. The opportunity came exactly where I expected it. A major investor meeting had already been scheduled before everything happened. Lily would lead it. She would present herself as the one stabilizing the company. That was her moment, and it would become mine. I didn't interrupt it. I didn't try to stop her. I let it happen. Because timing matters more than action. I prepared a timed release system connected to my audit data. Once activated, the information would be distributed simultaneously to the board, to regulators, to the investors in that room. There would be no delay, no filtering, no control. Once it started, it would unfold completely. I reviewed everything one last time. Every detail aligned. Every connection was clear. There were no gaps. For the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't defending. I wasn't waiting. I was in control. And when the moment came, it would only take one move. The meeting began exactly as I expected. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. I already knew how it would unfold. Lily would walk in calm, confident, and composed. She would present herself as the one holding everything together after the damage I caused. And that's exactly what she did. She spoke clearly, controlled every detail, and positioned herself as the solution. Investors listened. Some nodded. Others took notes. From the outside, it looked convincing. That's what made it dangerous. Because a well-delivered lie can feel like truth until it meets something stronger. I watched remotely, waiting for the right moment, not guessing, not hoping, waiting. Then I triggered the release. It didn't announce itself. It didn't warn anyone. It simply started. Screens froze. Presentations stopped. Files opened automatically across every connected device in the room. At first, it looked like a technical issue. Then, the data appeared. Transaction logs, system access records, time-stamped activity, structured, organized, clear. The room shifted instantly. Confusion replaced confidence. Silence followed. Because what they were seeing wasn't a claim. It was proof. The system didn't rush. It revealed everything step by step. Each transaction appeared with corresponding timestamps. Each approval linked to device signatures. Each system entry connected to access points that didn't match my profile. There was no interpretation required. It was clear. And clarity removes doubt. Lily tried to continue speaking at first. She attempted to regain control of the room, to redirect attention, to explain what was happening. But there was nothing to explain. The data spoke for itself. Every move she made was displayed in real time. The structure she built was being taken apart in front of everyone. Investors stopped writing. Board members leaned forward. The room didn't need noise. It needed understanding. And understanding had already arrived. This wasn't confusion anymore. It was exposure, the kind that cannot be reversed. Because once people see the full picture, they don't forget it. And more importantly, they don't ignore it. By the time I entered the building, everything had already shifted. The meeting was no longer structured. It was reactive, People stood in small groups, speaking in controlled tones, processing what they had just seen. No one was focused on presentation anymore. They were focused on reality. I walked in calmly. No urgency, no hesitation. Because I wasn't there to react. I was there to confirm what had already been revealed. As I entered the room, conversations stopped. Not out of shock, but out of recognition. They knew. I didn't need to explain anything. The system had already done that. I simply stood there, allowing the moment to settle. Then I looked at Lily. For the first time since everything began, she didn't look composed. She looked uncertain, and that told me everything. Not because she had lost control, but because she finally understood she never had it. Authorities were already on their way by the time the meeting ended. The data had been sent not just to the room, but to regulators and investigators simultaneously. There was no delay, no chance to contain it, no way to reshape the narrative. That was intentional, because once information becomes public and verified, it cannot be controlled. Lily tried to speak to me before they arrived. Her tone was different now, less confident, less structured, more uncertain. "Alice, I can explain," she said. I didn't respond immediately. I just looked at her, not with anger, not with frustration, but with clarity, because I didn't need an explanation. I had already seen everything. And when you understand something completely, there is nothing left to discuss. The charges against me were cleared within days. Not reduced, not adjusted, removed completely. Because the evidence didn't just suggest the truth, it proved it. The structure she built collapsed the moment it was exposed. Because it was never stable. It was only hidden, and hidden systems fail when they are forced into the light. The company entered a transition period immediately after. Leadership shifted. Processes were reviewed. Control structures were rebuilt. But for me, the outcome was already clear. This wasn't about recovery. It was about reconstruction. Because once something like this happens, you don't return to what existed before. You build something stronger. And this time, nothing would be left unchecked. The company didn't collapse after everything was exposed. It paused. That's the difference between something weak and something worth rebuilding. Weak systems break completely. Strong ones reveal their flaws, then wait to be corrected. The board called me in 3 days after the charges were cleared. This time, I wasn't sitting across from them as someone being questioned. I was sitting as someone being asked to lead. They didn't try to explain what happened. They didn't defend their decisions. They asked one thing: what do we need to do to fix this? That question told me everything, because it meant they understood something important. This wasn't a mistake. It was a structural failure. And structural failures require structural solutions. I didn't answer immediately. I outlined conditions. Full operational authority. Direct reporting to the board. Complete transparency across all systems. No hidden approvals. No isolated control points. They agreed without hesitation. That confirmed what I already knew. This situation had gone beyond damage control. It required complete redesign. And I was the only person who understood the system deeply enough to rebuild it correctly. Returning to the office felt different, not because of what people said, but because of what they didn't. Conversations paused when I walked past. Not out of fear, out of awareness. Everyone knew something had happened, even if they didn't know every detail, and that changed how they looked at me. Not as someone who had been accused, but as someone who had seen everything and responded. I didn't acknowledge it. I focused on the work. The first step was control redistribution. No single individual would ever hold unchecked authority again. I broke access into layers, verification points, approval chains, independent oversight. Every system had to confirm itself through multiple paths. No shortcuts, no assumptions, because systems fail where assumptions exist. I also implemented full traceability. Every action, financial, operational, administrative, would be recorded and verifiable. Not visible to everyone, but visible where it mattered. Because visibility creates accountability. And accountability prevents repetition. This wasn't just rebuilding, it was restructuring power itself. Resistance came quietly at first. Not openly, not directly, but through hesitation, through questions framed as concern, through subtle attempts to preserve old methods. I expected that. People don't resist change because it's wrong. They resist it because it's unfamiliar. I didn't push harder. I stayed consistent. Clear rules, clear systems, clear outcomes. No exceptions. Over time, something shifted. Not because people were forced to adapt, but because the system made sense. Decisions became easier to track. Errors became easier to identify. Processes became more efficient. And once people saw the results, resistance faded. That's how real change works. Not through pressure, but through clarity. Because when a system is built correctly, it doesn't need enforcement. It sustains itself. And that's what I was building. Not control, structure. As everything stabilized, I found myself reflecting on the moment I chose not to react. The night I discovered what she was doing, I could have confronted her. I could have stopped everything immediately, but that would have changed the outcome. It would have given her time to adjust, time to hide, time to shift the narrative. Instead, I waited. I observed. I understood the full structure before making a move. That's what made the difference. Because this wasn't about proving a point. It was about removing doubt completely. And doubt disappears when evidence is undeniable. That's why timing matters. Not when something happens, but when it's revealed. And once revealed correctly, there's no recovery from it. That's what she didn't understand. And that's why she lost. Trust changed for me after everything that happened. Before, I believed trust was built through intention, through shared goals, through consistency over time. Now, I understood something different. Trust is built through verification, through systems that confirm actions, not just words. I didn't become distant. I became precise. I paid attention to patterns, to behavior under pressure, to decisions when no one was watching. Because that's where truth exists. Not in statements, but in actions. That understanding changed everything. Not just in work, but in life. Because once you see clearly, you don't go back to assuming. You move forward with awareness. And awareness is stronger than trust. Because it doesn't rely on belief. It relies on understanding. I didn't attend the final hearing in person. I didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already been documented, verified, and presented. The system had done its job. The evidence had done more than defend me. It had rewritten the entire narrative. Lily, on the other hand, had no system left to rely on. No structure, no control, only the reality she had built now, fully exposed. I reviewed the outcome later that day. Charges filed. Assets frozen. Legal proceedings initiated. It was all structured, predictable, because once the truth is clear, the outcome becomes inevitable. People often think justice is about emotion. It isn't. It's about alignment. When facts, evidence, and timing align, there is only one direction things can go. I didn't feel satisfaction reading it. I felt clarity. Because this was never about bringing her down. It was about removing everything that was false. And once that was gone, what remained was simply reality. Unfiltered, unavoidable, and final. Returning to full control of the company didn't feel like reclaiming something lost. It felt like stepping into something new. Because what I had before no longer existed, and that was necessary. I didn't restore the company to its previous state. I rebuilt it entirely. Every system was reviewed, every access point redefined, every process redesigned with one principle in mind. Nothing operates without verification. Not approvals, not financial movements, not decision-making authority. Everything had structure. Everything had traceability. And more importantly, everything had accountability. The company became stronger, not because it was more controlled, but because it was more transparent. People understood how decisions were made. They understood how systems worked. And that understanding changed behavior naturally, because when people know they are part of a clear structure, they operate differently. That was the difference this time. Not power, clarity. My personal life changed the same way my professional one did. Quietly, intentionally. I didn't rush to rebuild relationships. I didn't try to replace what had been lost. I focused on understanding what I had overlooked before. Patterns, consistency, behavior over time. I stopped listening only to what people said. I started paying attention to what they did. Because that's where truth exists. Not in promises. Not in explanations. But in repeated action. That shift didn't make me distant. It made me aware. And awareness changes everything. Because once you understand how people operate, you stop being surprised by what they do. And more importantly, you stop being affected by it in the same way. I didn't lose trust. I refined it. And that made it stronger. I thought about her once more, not out of emotion, but out of understanding. Lily didn't fail because she wasn't capable. She failed because she believed control was about appearance. She believed that if people saw her in charge, that would be enough. But control isn't about what people see. It's about what holds under pressure. And what she built didn't hold, because it wasn't designed to. It was designed to replace, not sustain. That's the difference. Real systems endure. False ones collapse when tested. And hers was tested. Completely. There was no recovery from that. Not because I destroyed it, but because it couldn't exist once exposed. And that's what she never understood. You don't win by removing someone. You win by building something that can't be removed. And that's what I had. Even when everything else was taken, they thought they had ended my story. That's what made it so easy for them to move forward without hesitation. They believed the structure they built was complete, that it couldn't be challenged, that once I was removed, everything would settle into place. But they misunderstood something fundamental. You can remove a person, but you cannot remove a system they fully understand. Because understanding is not visible. It doesn't appear in reports. It doesn't show in approvals. But it exists in every decision made. Every pattern recognized, every flaw identified. And once you understand something completely, you don't need control to influence it. You just need the right moment. They thought they were ahead. They thought they had already won. But they never saw the full structure. They only saw the surface. And that's why they lost. Not because I fought harder, but because I understood deeper. And once you reach that level of clarity, there is no outcome where you don't win. I didn't win because I was stronger. I won because I understood. While they were focused on taking what I built, I was learning how they thought. While they were planning my fall, I was mapping their patterns. And by the time they believed they had control, I had already seen the ending. Betrayal doesn't destroy you. It reveals where you stopped paying attention. And once you see clearly, you don't react. You don't argue. You don't chase what was taken. You remove what was false and let the truth do the rest. They thought they were 5 steps ahead. They never realized I was already at the final move.